New Buddhaware Dhamma Talks. Geoff Hunt presents a talk on some aspect of the Buddha's teaching.
It's nice to see so many of you. And during this week, I was sent an email concerning justice and injustice and how we are to respond as individuals or as groups to what we're beginning to fear as a kind of repetition of history ahead once again. So that's an important issue. Of course, the Buddha was not a politician, and he was not an economist or anything of that kind. If you had to put a label on him, I suppose it would be spiritual or ethical or moral or something like that. But that's our ground, you know. That's if that's wrong, if we don't have the appropriate values, then it's not surprising if everything else starts going weird. So it's important to get some clarity in one's mind about justice and injustice. The first thing to say is that the word justice can be very confusing. To start with, it has at least two major meanings. One is distributive justice and the other is retributive justice. Distributive justice is about everybody getting their fair share of something. So, which is an important issue these days, because you look around the world and you see dire poverty and starvation on the one hand, and you see billionaires in their yachts on the other hand. And that seems to be normal. Well, morally, it's not normal at all. That's an issue of distributive justice, whether we are distributing the goods which human beings can enjoy in a fair way. Well, we're not discussing distributive justice. Well, not today anyway. We might touch on it. We're talking about retributive justice, which in a word is about how do we react to an injustice in terms, if you like, of the easiest word to come to mind is punishment. That is that we have to put things right by reacting to whoever is perceived to have done wrong. Well, this again is a very huge issue, because we can look at it on an individual level where one might feel one's been done wrong by anybody, a friend, a neighbor, a member of one's family, or a total stranger. And then the question always arises, how do I respond to that? Now, what we normally get, or what we often get, is reaction, not response. The reaction, we know, is just flaring up and wanting to cause pain to the person who you feel has hurt one. So what we're going to discuss is about retributive justice and what the Buddha thinks about it. Because we are so swimming about in kind of amoral soup. What I mean by amoral is that morality doesn't seem to come into things very often these days, whereas in fact it is the ground of human harmony and peace. We can't afford to neglect our understanding of moral issues. Now, while I'm doing this, I thought I should just check with you on what your understanding of meditation is. And then we can ask about how it connects with the issue of retributive or punishment style justice. So I think some of you will have seen this little booklet, which says on the front, Daily Life Exercises, which I put together in 2019. We've still got copies. Some of you have got copies, some of you haven't. And you will find it on the website. If you search on the website. Because what it's doing is emphasizing the fact that meditation isn't just sitting on your divan silently at home, or even in a retreat sitting on a cushion. That is meditation. depending on what your mind is doing. That's what we could call formal meditation. But informal meditation, I think, in this day and age is even more important, especially as we seem to have lost the way as human beings. And that is being aware of how you respond, maybe in seconds, to a situation that you encounter in real life. It could even be with your family, your partner. It could be with, I don't know, the ticket collector. It could be anybody, right? That's the field in which we test our meditative skills and our level of understanding. So this little booklet goes through some exercises in meditation, such as the body scan, breathing, walking meditation, then developing generosity, mindful eating, and so on and so forth. So it covers a lot of ground, really. And in some ways, I would wish that you were very cognizant of this little pamphlet, because I did put quite a lot of effort into thinking, what is it to do daily meditation? What is it to do ordinary, even petty-minded meditation? Because that is where we really learn things, and that is where there's an opportunity to change. There isn't one of us here that doesn't sometimes get it wrong, including me. Sometimes I will feel very angry about something, and sometimes I fall off the tightrope. It's like a tightrope, isn't it? Sometimes walking along the tightrope without falling off. Well, occasionally we fall off, and then we just have to get back on again and try better. So anyway, please do look at the little booklet. It is on the website if you haven't got a copy. Now, let's come back to justice, and then we can think about it also in terms of ordinary encounters. And the idea that we're narrowing it down to the idea that somehow, when you've been done an injustice, you have to put it right in equal terms. Somebody punches me on the nose, so I'll endeavor to punch them on the nose, put it simply. This is called retribution. That's a fancy word, but the not so fancy word is punishment. And now that can be on a scale of genocide, or it could be on the scale of the next door neighbor. And they can be, in a way, equally distressing. Perhaps the problem with the neighbor is more distressing than genocide going on in Myanmar, because we have direct contact with it as individuals. But actually, they're the same thing. They're the same thing. They're just on a different scale. So the fact that the neighbor has gone and made a hole in my fence, there's a way of handling that. And there's a way of not handling it, which results in even more. So you might think, well, he's made a hole in the fence there, so I'll go make a hole in his fence. That'll teach him. It won't teach him anything, actually. And it might make things matter a lot worse. That's a simple message. Right. So there's a little pang of pain at the neighbor making a hole in one's fence. But how much pain is there in being expelled from one's own country, as is happening with the Rohingya in Myanmar? It's pretty awful. And it shows us something about what we human beings can be when we have no moral ground, or we don't know where the moral ground is. Now, the way I'm going to approach this, well, there's one other thing I'd like to say by way of introduction, is there's at least 3 different ways of, and there are fancy words for these 3 different ways of responding to an injustice done to you. One is retribution. That is punching you on the nose, I'm going to punch you on the nose. The other is reconciliation. So let's sit down and have a talk about what this is really about. And a good example of that was what happened in South Africa when Nelson Mandela was released. There were a lot of people that wanted to take revenge. Black people who wanted to take revenge on white people. And it was Nelson Mandela who stopped them. He said, no, don't do that. What a great thing that he would stand up against even millions of people and say, no, that's the wrong way to go. So these committees were set up with Desmond Tutu to talk about, well, look, how do we make this right now? And there's a lot of tears, a lot of emotion. Thirdly, I don't know whether you've heard of this one, and that's restitution. If somebody hurt, okay, let's say we go back to the guy who's just made a hole in your fence. What would restitution be? What it would be is, could you kindly repair the hole that you've made in the fence? So there's some discussion about how we make amends, the idea of making amends. That I'm not going to punish you, and I don't think punishment is going to work, which is what the Buddha says. But restitution might, because restitution is about appealing to the other person to put right what they've done. Could be, you've taken this, could you now please give it back? Right? You might say, ha ha, that's not going to work very often, but surprisingly, it does work. It even works with hardened criminals sometimes. And there's a whole movement called restitution, which is an increasing portion of our justice system. Right, restitution, make amends. Okay, now I'm going to ask Paul in a moment to put up a document that we shall share. And just to tell you before we put it up what it is, it's a very famous verse from the Buddha's teachings, which is apparently, according to the experts, very early on. This is a very, very ancient document in which basically the Buddha is saying, you know, retribution doesn't work. We know it doesn't work. It hasn't worked for thousands of years, and it's not going to work. When are we going to learn that there has to be a different way when, you know, issues of injustice or feelings of injustice arise? So, okay, Paul is going to put up the document right now. Okay, I think we've got it all there. Yes, we've got it all there, nicely positioned. Thank you, Paul. Right, so this is the Dhammapada, which some of you will have heard of. Some of you may have read it. In fact, there is even a Penguin publication, Penguin booklet of the Dhammapada, translation into English from Pali. And it's a wonderful little book to dip into. Right near the beginning of the whole book, that's how important it is to him. He says this: he insulted me, he struck me, he defeated me, he robbed me. This is what somebody is saying. This is somebody who feels they've been done an injustice. This is someone who's lamenting about the justice. Why should you do that to me? So he's saying to the world, look, he insulted me. That's why I want to hurt him. He struck me. That's why I want to hurt him. He defeated me. He robbed me. Right. Now, the Buddha says very bluntly, for those who get caught up in this, hatred does not cease. You have to be very careful that you're just not going to now add fuel to the fire. It's a very simple message. It's a very simple message, but for some reason, we humans find it very difficult to actually do. The message is, hatred does not cease once you kick it off. So somebody hates you, maybe for no particular reason, because they're venting their emotions that have come from other quarters. They vent it on you. And then you feel it's an injustice. Well, why me? Why do this to me? So then you hate them. They hate you, you hate them. Before you know what, there's violence. And we're living in an era of nuclear missiles, so this is pretty serious, right? There's got to be another way. Hatred does not cease for those who go on lamenting about, he did this to me, he did that to me. Somehow we've got to absorb this and find a way forward. The second paragraph, he repeats the lament. He insulted me, he struck me, etc. So why shouldn't I punch him on the nose? The Buddha says, for those who do not get caught up in this, hatred ceases completely. That is, eventually. It's amazing the way it can work, and it must work because we haven't got an option. We haven't got an alternative. Not really. Not when we've got nuclear missiles. We haven't got an alternative. Not just to think that a global nuclear war is a few button presses away in the hands of some dictators. It's, it makes one feel afraid, quite frankly. And fear comes into the picture. Well, I must do something. Why don't we hit them first with the nuclear weapons? That'll stop them. Not a good idea. Anyway, the Buddha goes on. For those who do not get caught up in this, hatred ceases completely. For never here, in this situation, do hatreds cease by hatred. So it kicks off with hatred, and then we respond to it with hatred. But the initial hatred is not going to cease because you kicked off with your hatred against the hatred. No, it's going to double it. So that is why bit by bit we end up hating a group of people and we want to kill them all. How insane is this? Is the human being, Homo sapiens, actually insane that we can't get over this obstacle? So, okay, for never here in this situation do hatreds cease by hatred. By freedom from hatred, they cease. May be difficult, but not half as difficult as throwing hatred at hatred. So by freedom from hatred, they cease. This is a perennial truth. What does he mean by perennial? Perennial means that it goes on year after year, day after day. It's a truth that is always with us. This truth that by freedom from hatred, hatreds will cease. That's a perennial truth. The perennial truth that you can easily multiply hatred by throwing hatred at hatred. That's also a perennial truth. So we are dealing with it's perennial insofar as we human beings have always lived by it. If you look at history, it's just an unceasing catalogue of violence. Don't tell me we're not insane. We are insane. But at least we can know we are and start to do something about it. And of course, good people have always tried to do something about it, whether it's Jesus or the Buddha or many other spiritual leaders, saying, let's get back to the moral ground. Let's get back to why we think like this. Because it's from the thinking that the action comes. Okay, paragraph 4. Others do not understand that we must control ourselves here. In other words, instead of just reacting, he's been horrible to me, he's punched me, so I'm going to punch him. There isn't any understanding there. It's just reaction. But the Buddha recognizes that others may not understand this. In fact, the vast majority, if you just pull off anybody off the street and talk about this, they'll say, well, somebody hurts me, I'm going to hurt them back. So he uses the word control. It's one way of looking at it. I don't really think that's a very good choice of a word because it sounds like some sort of manipulation of oneself, where it's really coming to understand oneself and understanding the human condition. For those who do understand this, quarrels cease. Right, this looks like a pretty big, it's a tall order, isn't it? Tall order, you might think. One part of you is saying, we human beings, we're just not up to this. Others are saying, well, if you think that, then it is going to get worse. So we can't think that. So it just goes round and round and round in our heads. Right, now, what I'm going to do is leave that there for a moment. I don't know whether you can you still see me, Paul, while this is on? Yeah, okay. So what I want you to do now is pick up the pencil and paper that I mentioned earlier, because it does have to focus the mind to write something down. So anything that you think you'd like to say, oh, that's good, I think that's right, or no, that's wrong, or that's too idealistic, or whatever you may think, just have 5 minutes of thought and just jot something down, okay? So I'm going to be silent now. Over to you, all 45 of us, to think about this question. Doesn't matter how simple or banal you might think it is, just say it. Okay, let's stop there. So I'm going to ask Paul to take the document away from the screen. Okay, thank you. Right now it's over to Lynn to manage what happens next, because now it's an open forum for you to discuss.
New Buddha Way lets go of East and West and starts afresh in the life we have now. For more information, visit www.newbuddhaway.org.